we have been part of the kind of technology and design industry for quite a few years now. I work with a bunch of agencies and all that kind of stuff. You can have a look on LinkedIn if you're interested. I'm mostly on the design side, and Christian is more on the product management, engineering side. And at the moment we're focused almost primarily on mobile. We bumped into Drew via somebody else that we knew, and we showed him some of the stuff that we've been doing in our various careers, in our various kind of jobs, and he thought it might be interesting to come along and just talk about some of that stuff. And when we were trying to figure out what exactly to talk about rather than just talk about everything that we've done, we realised that a lot of the work that we've done had been in music and technology. So we thought that was probably a reasonable thing to talk about. We've got a bunch of projects that we'll have a look at in time, but we were looking for sort of a common thread that ran through all these things, and we tried to figure out what we thought were the successful ingredients for a project that involves both music and technology. And so that obviously when we came to our next project, or anybody else came to the next project, we could simply look at this list and we were wildly successful. And we came to the conclusion that the basic ingredients for a successful project are as follows. So one is skill, so obviously having a decent team behind you. The next thing is a certain amount of luck. This is in no particular order, but if you don't have luck, then luck plays an enormous part in taking something that's simply a good idea and making it something that's a good idea that's wildly successful. Pleasure, so you have to build something that people enjoy using. Whether it's a sort of common garden B2B application or it's something for consumers, if it isn't a pleasure to use, people won't want to go back and carry on using it. And then lastly, a rather mouthful, which is a bunch of sort of socio-economic influences that you understand that they're going on and you can identify them, but they're completely outside of your control. And that's kind of rolled into the luck thing. And we came to this conclusion not just by looking at the stuff that we built, excuse me, but looking at some technology from the past. And so the first example we wanted to look at is sort of pre-iPhone, pre-iPad, pre-sort of MacBook Retina, and that's the piano. So the piano is interesting in that it was built, the piano started to come to light at around sort of mid-1800s, and this is a grand piano, as you can see, and the reason for the piano was because it provided a different sound. So if we listen to, this is the clavichord, so you can hear it's quite a reedy sound, not an awful lot of tone, very, very small keyboard, so I don't know if you can still hear me. So that's the clavichord or the harpsichord. Doesn't have a vast amount of range, doesn't have a vast amount of projection of sound, you can't generate an awful lot of different noises using that. Whereas if you listen to something like the piano, so you can immediately hear that it has a greater tone, you have a larger number of octaves you can choose from, it's a more adaptable instrument, you can get more out of a piano. And so the piano started to come through in its grand form towards the end of the 18th century. But what we're interested in really is the upright. This is a Giraffe piano that started to come through towards the end of the 18th century. And you can see what they've done in order to save space is to take a grand piano and kind of stick it on its end. And in their infancy they weren't terribly popular. The mechanism wasn't very good, the sound they produced wasn't very, very good. But the basic idea of an affordable piano that didn't require an awful lot of space was very, very sound. So people carried on developing them over time. And what happened around the 1800s was the invention of this piano. This piano really looks far more like the traditional upright pianos that we may all know. And it was a man called Isaac Hawkins, and there were basically a number of innovations that came through. And these innovations were, he used a steel frame to hold the soundboard. The soundboard is the thing that the strings broadly sit on, and they help to resonate the sound out. And he made a metal frame to hold that, which meant the resonance was much, much better. He also made it so that the strings went from top to bottom. You can see with the Giraffe piano, they stick up, and again you've got this enormous box that has to house these strings. And he also made strings of the same length. So instead of having varying lengths for different sounds, they're all of the same length. Now, these are all very, very good ideas. Again, it was an okay piano, it didn't make a great sound, and it took another 15 years for the next to come out in 1815, which was a man called Robert Warnham. And he produced a piano along the same lines. And the quarterly musical magazine at the time said that it produced a sound that was firm, sonorous and brilliant, and remarked that it stayed in tune. So this was the first kind of reliable upright piano that came out. But it was still going to take another 20 years for the upright piano to become extremely successful. And the reasons for this were as follows. So the first was the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is getting into sort of full swing around sort of 1820. And what came with that was obviously steam power, and with that came new ways of producing materials. So that steel frame, which we saw in that innovative new upright, was able to be produced at scale and at good cost. Along with the Industrial Revolution came the middle classes. And the middle classes wanted to show off. And a good way of showing off their wealth was by having a piano. And the upright piano was more and more affordable, so they started to buy upright pianos. With this, their new status, they also wanted to project their new status and protect it. So if you think about Jane Austen and the landed gentry, this was the same for the middle classes. They wanted their daughters to marry well. So buying a piano and teaching your daughter to play the piano was a very, very important skill for her to have, because essentially it meant that she could be married on to someone and she could be more and more desirable. On top of that, it was also good, actually I should say, that's also a good opportunity for them to meet husbands. At the time, in this period of time, young men and women weren't necessarily left alone all that often because they would get up to who, God knows what. But having a piano gave them a diversion by which they could come together and do something relatively harmless. But it was a very, very good way for young men and women to meet one another and to meet their future husbands. This is slightly oblique, so this is a statesman called Metternich, and he was sort of operating in Austria around 1820, 1830, and he's a very, very famous diplomat, but he's famous for also employing the use of secret service in order to crush liberalism and to manage the department, to manage the behaviour of the people within the Austrian state. And as a result of that, the piano became more and more popular because it meant that people could entertain at home. They didn't have to go outside and mix with people that they didn't know. They could control their own affairs. And finally, the last thing, I know this is a lot of bits and pieces, was similar with an iPhone or an iPad. These things are useless without software. If you don't have any software to put on it, it's just a nice looking object. And it's the same with these pianos. Concertos are all very well, but when it comes to wanting to play something in your home, a concerto is far too grand a piece. So people like Mendelssohn on the left and Schumann on the right started to compose music that was specifically made for the piano. So Schumann was particularly prolific. I think in 1840 he turned out these Lieder, which is what you were, not what you were hearing before, but Lieder are basically songs for one person playing the piano and one person singing. Again, maybe a man and a woman coming together and having a sing together and getting on. He also produced a thing called Album für Jugend, which is what you did just hear, which was playing in the background, which were books of songs for beginners and children to learn the piano. So all of these elements came together 20 years later after the major innovation of the upright piano, and it became an enormous success. And essentially, it wasn't just another sort of piano, it generated a new form of musical tradition. So if we look back at those elements, the skill was in the building of the thing, the pleasure was in the playing of the thing, the socio-economic influences we've just kind of been through, and there was also a reasonable amount of luck that all of these things happened to come together at exactly the same time. And broadly, we felt that most of the stuff that we've worked on when it comes to music and technology, some have been successful, some haven't been quite so successful, is as a result of all these various bits and pieces coming together at the right time or not coming together at the right time. The one thing that we should stress, though, is about pleasure, and this sort of carries on today. So this is an upright being played in New York, and you might have seen them around in London as well. This is at King's Cross Station. And there's an artist whose name I'm going to look up, a guy called Luke Jerram, who put these pianos all over cities, and people, when they see them, can go up and simply get on with playing them. And the success of that is also around this kind of piece of luck. You have to have somebody who's able to play the piano and come across this object somewhere that they don't know. They then have to have the willingness to start playing, and it generates this little event. And these events, I don't know if you've ever seen anyone sitting down and playing one, but they generate these quite large crowds in quite a short space of time. They become enormously successful in their own little way. So the upright piano, you know, it might seem a little anachronistic to draw on it, but it seems to make some reasonable points. So if we move sort of forwards in time a little bit, we get to Shazam, and Shazam, a lot of Shazam was about being in the right place at the right time. And I didn't actually work with Shazam, but I've worked with people who work with Shazam, and Christian's one of those people. So I'm going to hand over to Christian, and he's going to talk a little bit about Shazam. So.
Thank you. So I'll take a step forward in history because I'm much worse at history than Daniel, and I'll just talk about a little bit about what happened at the beginning of Shazam and how the whole idea came to be basically. And so when you read things about startups, about what should I do as a business idea, what should I spend effort on, and people say, well, identify a problem, identify something that people are going to be interested in having solved for them. And one of the founders, the first one who had the idea, came from the idea that he said, well, everybody's always trying to identify a song. You're always trying to figure out what is playing. You're trying to figure out what is playing on the radio, in a pub. And you go to the store and you say, yeah, you know this song, la la la. And the music clerk just holds his head and says, my God, forget it. And so he went literally to a music university. He went and called up music universities and said, I want to identify music for people, how do I do it? And they said, well, we produce music, but we have no clue what you're talking about, but maybe ask a computer science department. So he called up some computer science departments, and that's how he came onto the founder, his co-founder, who came up with an algorithm to identify the music. But initially, the guy said it's impossible. And he called him back 3 months later saying, hey, I cracked it, I think I have a solution. And that's what's really interesting is then they built a team, and that's where I was part of this original team, and we had to build a system that would hold all the possible music, be able to be updated every day. You would be able to call the system. We had no clue how to do this. We actually we figured out how to do it because we thought, hey, hold on, when I called the bank, because we were all setting bank accounts, we moved to London, we were setting up bank accounts. I called the bank, and there's this system that says, press 1 for blah, press 2 for blah, or record your message. And that's exactly what we need, right? People can call, record a sound, and we can process that sound. And so we went to a bank and asked what the systems are called, and we figured out how it works, built it from scratch. And so what was really interesting is we managed to build a system eventually that would really recognize music over a phone. That system, back in 2002 we launched it, and it was really interesting because it had nothing. There was no iTunes store, there were no smartphones, there was just a number. So at the time we called it Tag a Song. We had this ninja thing going, we had, it evolved a lot from then. And what was interesting is we had a short dial code. You could call it up, we would charge for the SMS, you could buy a ringtone. So the timing was right in the sense that we had the right problem solved, and people wanted this, and the technology started to allow that. And the timing was wrong at the same time, because remembering a number is really difficult. By the time you hear a song, you're halfway through the song. You have to remember that you actually have a service on your phone that could solve the problem for you of recognizing that song. By the time you realize that, you pull the phone out, unlock, then you have to remember the number. Maybe it's saved somewhere in your address book. You don't particularly know the numbers. And anyway, so by the end, you get to a point where the song's gone. And so it was difficult to get people to remember the song. We tried advertisement, we tried all sorts of things, and it was really difficult. And so for 2 years, we tried all sorts of things, marketing, all sorts of, I don't know what, co-branding, everything. And actually Shazam, I think is there today not only because we put a lot of effort into it, but also because there was a lot of luck actually, when the iPhone came out. So the iPhone came out with an iTunes store. The iPhone came out with icons that you could put on the home screen, so you didn't have to remember things anymore. We did negotiate before there was the iPhone. We did call up some operators and we said, hey, we think we have a solution for you to sell more of your phones. And they said, really, what is it? We said, well, you put a Shazam button on the middle of the phone. It's genius, it's going to solve all your problems. And they said, yeah, thank you, you're company number 150 this month calling us. There was the pizza company that said you could order a pizza on button. There's the cab company that says order a cab now, where the phone. So basically, every company had this idea and called up operators to say, I want my button on there to do something. And so the iPhone solved a lot of these problems. You could put Shazam on your home screen. You could directly buy the music from the phone, and you had a sort of web interface. You had a real app on which you could manage your tags, you could see categories, you could discover more content, you could later on, a few features that Dennis is going to speak about as well. So Shazam is basically a story of a lot of effort in the beginning, and then quite some luck that Apple came up with the iPhone at the time. But what's funny is the timing. If that had all come at the same time, it would have been probably a much faster success. But it didn't come at the same time. It was 3 years, 3 years in the making. So Shazam came out a bit early, and was lucky enough that the iPhone came out 3 years later. And then after Shazam, so I quit Shazam actually before the iPhone came out, and then we're moving on to AppSmart, where Daniel is going to tell you a bit of story after that.
So Christian went from Shazam to Google, and spent some time working at Google. I think he was at Google for 5 years, and as he said, the iPhone basically, I don't think it's any secret, but it's quite hard to make money off IVR, which is this 2580 service. You're not going to make huge amounts of money off this. And cutting these deals with Motorola and these various other handset makers was pretty hard work. So essentially the timing of the iPhone really changed the landscape for Shazam, and it allowed them to reach kind of customer base numbers. I think it's around 150 million installed customer base. So I think it might actually be higher, but those are people who are repeatedly using the service week after week, and they're making money off these people, and they become a viable business. And again, as Christian was saying, it's a combination of all these things coming together at the same time. Things that couldn't be planned. It's not like Shazam planned for the iPhone to come out. It just came out at the right time and saved the business. So when Christian went off to Google, and I was part of a company called AppSmart, and AppSmart had been set up by a gentleman called Raoul Pavard, and Raoul Pavard was one of the original engineers on Shazam, so that kind of closes this loop. And I'd met Raoul at a company called Method, which I don't know if people know, they're New York, and they have an office in London, and we set that up. And then I went off to Germany, kept in touch with Raoul, and Raoul said, I'm going to start this company called AppSmart. Are you interested in coming back? And the idea of AppSmart, well, I did, and the idea of AppSmart was a company that would not only produce applications for other people, so things for mobile devices, but we'd also make our own products. And again, music and technology was something that we all kind of knew about one way or another, so we stuck to our guns and did quite a lot of work in this space. So I thought I'd have a look at a couple of the projects that we did. The first one, or one of the early ones, was something called AirJ. And rather than try to explain what AirJ actually did, or does, it's probably best just to try and show you this video, see if it... It's terrible quality, by the way.
Hi, I'm Adam from AirJ. And we've got a new iPhone application, and what it does is it converts your movements into MIDI over a Wi-Fi network. So I'll do a little quick demonstration for you and show you what that actually means and what you can do with it. So say you want to play some instruments, you might want to play some percussion. Or maybe some drums, you know. So you can map different gestures to different sounds. Because this is all MIDI, it's totally configurable. So maybe you want a kick drum here, snare here, hi-hats here, floor tom, you know, you can put a beat. And there are other things you can do. Say you want to play like an air piano, you know. Using the gyroscopes and the accelerometers. So, like you play air guitar. So you want to trigger a track as well and use it as a DJ, you know.
So anyway, you get the story. It's quite a nice thing. It was quite hard to do. So it required quite a lot of skill because we had to reverse engineer all the MIDI interface with the iPhone. There wasn't documentation at the time, so we had to do a lot of reverse engineering in order to make that happen. The interface around it is quite complicated. It's quite a kind of pro tool. Adam was a DJ and wanted to kind of spice up his performances. I'm sort of doing a bit what a lot of you see a kind of electronic music and DJs do these days, is the standing behind a laptop with very little performance. So he wanted to introduce some performance. So it's quite a cute product. The thing about it's reasonably successful, but it's not hugely successful. And looking back at the piano, it hasn't really got its upright version. It's kind of the grand piano. It's for people who have a reasonable amount of money. It's not a cheap application to buy. And it requires quite a lot of skill in terms of setting it up. So setting up the interfaces with whether you happen to be using GarageBand or Ableton or whatever music production software you're using, it takes a certain amount of expertise in order to do that. Then configuring the application requires some skill. It all takes time and energy. What we kind of needed was the upright version, which was a bit more consumer friendly, that had some sounds already integrated, that was just easier to set up and use. And we never quite got around to doing that for various reasons. But again, with all these various bits and pieces coming together, it was a good application at not a bad time, but it wasn't quite correctly executed in order for it to work for that audience. Something we've kept in touch with Shazam, obviously, because of the connections that we had, and they were looking to do something else with the application rather than just recognizing music. And we'd started to do some early tests with the lyrics side of things, so lyrics recognition. And what was great being able to do things. Actually, I'll tell you what. I'll show you that first. So I'll just turn this down. Fingers crossed this will work. This isn't necessarily my favourite song, but it works. It should do. So it does the normal tag. I don't know if you see that, but it then pulls up the lyrics, and it shows the lyrics in time with the song. So what a lot of the other things are doing, what they're doing is they'll find the lyrics and just give you the lyrics. But what we're doing is we're finding the lyrics, syncing the lyrics with the speed at which the song is being played, and then playing them back to you using OpenGL software, using the OpenGL graphics. And I'll stop this now. I have some other examples. So it's reasonably clever, and whenever you show it to people, they really, really like it. And they have a database. I think they bought a company to do all of the lyrics, notation, and timing. And I think they've got a database of about 30,000, 40,000 songs, which is pretty small given the entire catalogue is up in the many, many millions. It's quite a nice feature, and we were only able to do this because the next iPhone came out. So the iPhone has really helped Shazam out in quite a lot of ways, because it improved the processing power and the graphics performance, so we could do quite a lot more with a similar handset. The problem with it, though, I guess, is that, well, it's not really a problem, but it's only ever going to be an adjunct to the main event. The main event is the tagging and finding out what the song is, and it's not called karaoke. Now, everybody immediately says, oh, that's great, you can use it for karaoke, but for legal reasons, you can't use the word karaoke, because Shazam are having to cut deals with the various record labels in order to do the lyrics. So, again, sort of a lot of things came together, a lot of skill. The luck was kind of there because the phone came out at the right time, but we weren't able to really leverage it as much as we'd like because of other forces outside of our control. If we'd had our way, we would have made a totally separate application and sold it purely on the back of being karaoke, but that wasn't possible. So again, kind of mixed success, which I think is, it's a great piece of engineering and it works beautifully, but I think it could have been more successful, but the timing wasn't quite right. So having had a few projects in music that had sort of a modicum of success, but we'd enjoyed doing them, AppSmart, we decided that we wanted to work on our own product. And rather than just have a great idea, we thought we'd spend some time looking at how people consume music today. Now, obviously, there's an awful lot of stuff out there right now, but we thought we'd have a look at that. And what we found, obviously, it's very, very easy to get hold of music now. Very, very easy. I mean, the iTunes store has a huge a huge number of tracks that you can get hold of, and Spotify and various other things. Getting hold of music is no longer the problem. The problem is choosing which music to listen to. There's an enormous amount of choice, and lots of the companies are trying to solve this choice problem. So if you look at something like Spotify, this is an idea of the amount of choice that you have. These are quite old figures. There's, I don't know, 6 months, a year old, whatever. But basically they had 12 million tracks at the time. They said they were adding 14,000 new tracks a day. And if you work that through, that turns out to 29 days worth of new music added every single day. So not all of that is going to be applicable to you, but it just enters this great big bucket of music that you have to choose from. And people have tried to solve this in various ways. iTunes tried to do it with the Genius. I don't know if anybody's had any success with that. I haven't had a huge amount of success with Genius. Spotify have obviously tapped into social, and that works reasonably well depending on the taste of your friends and whether your friends can actually be bothered to make playlists and share them with other people. There are an enormous number of playlists out there, but there's a certain amount of work involved. We like radio. We like radio for a couple of reasons. We like radio because the people behind the mic are sort of professional music choosers. That's their job. They are there to make those connections between one piece of music and another piece of music that you may not otherwise make. So computers have a very hard time making connections over and above a lot of simple metadata or things like beats per minute. So they're not necessarily going to say, okay, I play song 1 and then song 2 I'm going to choose and play to you because the lead singer in the second band went out with the drummer of the first band, and then the third song I'm going to play is because it's sunny outside. Those kinds of ways of choosing music, computers aren't terribly good at doing that. DJs are pretty good at doing that, and if you find a station that you like that does this well, you tend to listen to it a lot. And the other thing we like about music is serendipity, which is you can listen to a radio station, and because you like a particular kind of track, you're then likely to hear something else that you didn't know you were going to like. You end up sitting through music rather than with iTunes or Spotify. I think you're always tempted to skip forwards to the next track. Radio, for want of a better word, sort of forces you to listen to what's being offered to you, and as a result, you find things you don't necessarily know that you were going to like at that point in time when you switch the radio on. So, for all these reasons, we really, really like radio. Now, the problem, when I was growing up, I've stopped growing up now. When I was younger, there were probably about 4 radio stations that were on offer. There was obviously Radio 1, Radio 2 I don't think I even knew about. There was Radio Solent, because I grew up down near the south coast. There was 2 Counties Radio. There were about sort of 4 or 5 radio stations to choose from. It's not terribly difficult to make a choice from 5 or 6 radio stations. But now we have the internet. So I've now got access to thousands and thousands of radio stations. So the problem I had before was not being able to get hold of music. Then there was loads of music and I didn't know which to choose. And then I thought, radio is a great solution. And now there's millions and millions of radio stations to choose from. So I'm back in the same kind of hole again. So there's been quite a few people who are trying to solve this kind of radio question. These are screen grabs from quite a well-known radio application that will remain unnamed. But this is one way of doing it, which is just giving lists of radio stations to people. Now, the problem with this is that I then have to go through each of those radio stations and figure out if they're playing the kind of music that I'm interested in. So again, I'm burning more time having to step through all these radio stations. I want somebody to tell me, this is a radio station that you might be interested in, or you already like radio station A, and radio station B, C, D, E, and F are similar in some ways and different in others, so you might want to try those out and give me some sort of informed choices. And that's where this product comes in, which is called MP-Me. And yes, so this is very small text, but essentially this is what MP-Me does. It listens to thousands and thousands of radio stations in real time. It catalogues all the music that is being played on each of these radio stations. It then looks at your music library and the music that you've been listening to recently and says, hey, these are the radio stations that might be of interest to you. I mean, this is the kind of tip of the iceberg, because it can do lots of other things as well. But essentially what it does is it recommends which stations to listen to and when to listen to them. Now, I would go on and show a sort of demo of it, but I'm not involved in MP-Me anymore, because while we were developing MP-Me, we're a startup, so we're doing other things as well. We needed to pay the bills. So much as we're developing our own product and loving it and all this kind of stuff, we did need to, have some money coming in. So we were doing work for Thomson Reuters. You may know Reuters as a kind of picture agency. Reuters got together with Thomson, and Thomson are a large information company, so they have a lot of information for IP and science, legal, finance. They power a lot of desktop applications for traders, they power applications for lawyers. They're basically kind of a large information source, massive company in the US, and they got together with Reuters, and the Olympics were happening, and they asked us to work on an application for the Olympics. So we've been working on NPMe, we've also been working on the Olympics application, and it wasn't quite as straightforward, but they liked it so much, they bought the company. So we ended up getting acquired by Thomson Reuters, which meant that we could no longer work on NPMe. So we had to stop that. But we liked it so much, again, everyone liked it so much, that we wanted it to be carried on. So NPMe was carved out into a kind of separate entity, and that's where Christian comes in, because Christian was known by role from being at Shazam. Christian obviously spent time at Google. Christian knows what he's doing. So somebody was required in order to come in and take NPMe on. So that's what Christian does now. Christian looks after NPMe. So there's a demo, and he can sort of tell you some stuff about it. So I'll hand back over to him. So there we go. I don't know how loud it is.
Cool. Well, as I was saying, I've worked with Rahul in the past. I've worked on, I've followed NPMe from when they were building it. I was always the very avid beta tester, and yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea for I think used the word serendipity earlier. It's really a fantastic idea for discovering music completely without effort, and passing the stage of building a playlist. I mean, how many playlists have you built over time? You've built some on iTunes, you've built some on Spotify. Mostly I copy them from other people because I can't be bothered anymore. What's fantastic about this is that from all the work you've put in, so playlists you've copied, playlists you've built, music you've downloaded, from all this work, with this kind of engine, you will find new stuff. So it will point you to radio stations where DJs are doing the work for you. Finding new music, finding pre-releases that you don't have access to, finding old stuff that you forgot about. A lot of music that is really enjoyable, that exists, and that you simply wouldn't discover out of coincidence, and it would take you a lot of work to find. And so we're trying to really tap into this kind of work. So I have a small demo. This is NPMe. So you have a list of radio stations. You basically start by, you pick an artist you like. In this case, you type something like No Doubt, and the engine literally in real time comes up with a lot of recommendations where there's one playing right now. There's others that are very similar that have played it recently, that it matches your playlists. So this is the radio that plays it right now. The other radios, I don't think we have the sound. Well, it doesn't matter. There we go. And so you have a full playlist. So this is what the engine is using to match your music taste with whatever the radio's playing. And then you have a music discovery aspect. So you find new music through the DJs, and then you can actually explore it much more in depth. So you find information through the playlist. We also know where the artists have been played a lot, so you can find the top radios for each artist. Where have they been played over the last week? What are the favorite tracks that have been played from these artists over time? You can bookmark it. You can see your history that you've played as well. But the whole thing basically is geared towards discovering and enjoying music with the minimum amount of effort. I'm super lazy. I really like it. And so then we have a full integration on social as well. So you find your friends, you find the music likes of your friends, which will help you as well find new music. Where we want to go to is to have a much better integration on this side, and a much richer experience, even further than what we have now. So I don't have another word than effortless, really. I think effortless for me is the thing that does it, because I just pick up the application, I type in some artist, and I find radio stations that I really like. And the DJ, you know, if you hit a show on a radio station on a slot of an hour or two, the chances are extremely high that there are other songs that you like in that show if you land there because it's similar to what you like. And this is really where you know, when you use this for an hour or two, the whole discovery becomes very, very interesting, and that's when you realize what the engine does in the background. So MPME so far has, the industry liked it. It won a music discovery category. UKTI likes it. We're featuring Stuff magazine as well. You can download it from the iPad. I have to say, I don't know how much. Yeah, we're building the iPhone version. No, I was just not sure what the next slide is. It's all white.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I'm so sorry. And yeah, we're building it for the iPhone at the moment. We're going to launch it pretty soon. If you're very, very interested to have an early build, come see me. If you have an iPhone, we can only give, you know, a handful away of early testers, but maybe in a few weeks we can put a few of you on the build as well, and you're going to be able to listen to it on the bus, running around, and, you know, find all sorts of music. That said, I'm not sure what's on this slide.
Come over here and I go back.
Good, it's Daniel's slide.
So yeah, I think they're just finished. They're just finishing the iPhone now, so that will be out soon.
That's why I thought again.
So how are we for time? What's the?
We're kind of
At the stop talking stage, right? So that's broadly the end of the talk. I guess in summary, we've done a reasonable amount of stuff. I mean, there's other stuff we've done, but we've done a reasonable amount of stuff in music technology. Some of it's been more successful than other stuff. That's as a result of sometimes things happening at the right time and some things don't happen at the right time. So, you know, try and fail, and sometimes it comes together and it all works out great. I think MPME has a lot of those ingredients, and the time is very, very good for it. So I think, you know, fingers crossed, it will start to get some traction and plenty of people will start using it, and that's really the best you can do, and you hope for a bit of luck. And I guess that's kind of about it. Actually, I was going to do one other thing very, very quickly. Is this just something that I don't? Music and luck are quite kind of intertwined, and this is a story about luck and music, and it starts with an advertising agency who are asked to do some work in San Francisco for a bank. So let's go through to that.
Campaign in the late 60s for a bank. They were an old-fashioned bank with old-fashioned customers, all of whom were either dying or about to, and they were trying to replace those people with some younger customers. I decided that there wasn't anything to talk about. So I went to the president of the bank and I said, you know, I think what we ought to do is we ought to take some of your money and go out and get a whole bunch of songwriters to write a song about young people and their lives and how their lives are changing and things like that. And I can't tell you what the song is because I'm not a songwriter, and I can't even tell you what the commercials are because I can't tell you that until we do the song. He said, well, that's pretty vague.
So he took a pretty vague idea, went out, found a songwriter, got some songs written, made an advert, and the advert went out, and this is the sort of tail end of it.
All we were doing was just reflecting people's lives and doing it in a way that touched that audience. Well, they came into the bank in swarms, asking for money and stuff like that, and the bank finally decided they didn't want them there because they didn't have any money, and they didn't want to give them any money if they didn't have any collateral, so they killed the campaign eventually and got rid of it. But
So great idea, great execution, great results. Actually, not great results. Pulled the advert. End of story. Well, not quite, because have I got a slide of this? I have. Yeah. So although it got pulled, it got heard by a gentleman called Richard Carpenter. I don't know if people have heard of the Carpenters, but they were in the late 60s, early 70s. They were pretty schmaltzy, not necessarily to my taste, but they were absolutely massive. I mean, they sold huge numbers of records. And Richard Carpenter just happened to catch the advert on television, and he was in the car park of A&M Records, and he bumped into Paul Williams, and Paul Williams was the guy who'd written the song first time round. He said, this isn't verbatim, but he said, oh, hello, Paul. You know, you wrote this song, is there more to it? Because in an advert, you only have like a few bars. And he said, well, there sort of is, there sort of isn't. And he said, well, I'd really like to have a kind of crack at it. So what happened was this happened. So this is the original advert. No money, no money.
So many roads to choose.
So I don't know if people know this song, but it's hugely well known. It's in the Billboard 50 songs, amazing songs of all time, whatever. It was re-recorded by all sorts of people. So I've got a list here: Dionne Warwick, Curtis Mayfield, Johnny Mathis, Barbra Streisand, the ever debonair Liberace was also did a remake of this. This was their this led to two Grammy Awards for them, and it was their biggest selling single of all time. And all of that came about because they just happened to see an advert and happened to bump into the songwriter in a car park in a record company that they happened to be talking to at the time. So it's a great video as well, do look it up. So I guess that's just another example of how luck can sometimes play into your hands, and when it does, make the most of it. So that's it. Finally, we're over.